Very good. Well, greetings. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this beautiful Saturday morning. This is the, I guess, third in a series of quarterly meetings sponsored by Move to Amend Ohio that is replacing our annual gathering, in which we would have had all of these stellar speakers that we have had now over the last several months, all together in one place in one day. And so given the times that we're in, chose to string this out a bit, and by doing so, hopefully provide an educational opportunity that transcends any one day or a moment. And so here we are. The theme for this third of these quarterly gatherings is resisting the corporatization or privatization of education and food. And we are very happy to have a couple of long-standing and very knowledgeable experts I mean, just fearless and persistent advocates, educators, and organizers in these respective fields. So we will get to who they are and their presentations in a minute, but just wanted to welcome you and just say for, I think everyone here is well aware of what Move to Amend is and our goal, mission, and the like, so won't regurgitate any of that, but all to say that we feel that ever more, given the times we are in and this pandemic world, that conditions, both health-wise, economically, politically, ecologically, you name it, that the pandemic has just kind of brought to the fore and intensified and underscored what has been a series of fundamental systemic problems that have been going on for a very long time, but it's just now a bit more blatant and risen to the surface for all to see and for all of us to deal with in the scale that's necessary. And we think that scale is not sort of, Band-Aid, but fundamental and systemic. And that's why we are in support of what we call the We the People Amendment, HJR 48, that would call for the ending of all never intended constitutional rights for corporations, as well as the ending of the equally bizarre constitutional doctrine that political money in elections is equivalent to First Amendment free speech. And we believe that this We the People Amendment is merely a stepping stone toward more fundamental constitutional renewal that would create authentically and legitimately, for the very first time, something resembling authentic democracy, to the point of where we the people will, for the very first time, include all the people. So here we are, and appreciate you being with us. All right, so speakers this morning with us, beginning first, well, we're a little late, so with your patience, and if you are willing to hold over an extra 10 minutes, then we will permit our speakers to have their full allotment of time, which is a 45-minute segment for each of these speakers, William Phillis and Joe Logan. So we're going to begin with how we've chosen to organize this, is beginning first with Bill Phillis, who is the Executive Director of the Ohio Coalition for Equity and Adequacy of School Funding. Bill may want to talk a little bit about that. I am putting in the chat, and just by way of FYI, if you're not familiar, hopefully everybody is at this point, given the number of months we've been all using Zoom, how this works. If you wish to make a comment or ask a question, we'll reserve those until the end of the formal presentation, which we have asked each speaker to go, 15, 20 minutes, and we'll open it up for cussing and discussing. So if you want to, put those comments or questions in the chat, the way to do that is to go at the very bottom there. You'll see that little icon of a bubble with the word chat underneath it. Click it, and when you do so, you'll be able to give a comment or question in that space provided. And so to do that, feel free to go ahead and do that. And I am just including the link I pulled off the website for Bill's group that includes, if you go to that link, his very impressive bio. So we'll turn it over. Thank you very much, Bill, for being with us. Greetings.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to be with you this morning. Please forgive me for my lack of technological skills here in getting this getting on in time. I want to begin by just mentioning a couple things about the Coalition for Equity in School Funding. We're the group that brought the DeRolf case, where we won 4 Supreme Court decisions in favor of the public schools of Ohio. The court ruled that Ohio's elementary and secondary schools are neither thorough nor efficient back in 1997, which means that the state is not following the constitutional responsibility that it has for providing public education. But I want to give a little historical review with regard to the topic this morning. The state has a responsibility to provide a thorough and efficient system of common schools throughout the state, and that was a constitutional provision in 1851. But the roots of this provision dates back to the Ordinance of 1785, which set aside the 16th section of each township to support schools. So schools have always had, public schools of Ohio have always had the roots in a territory, in a geographic area. Now, the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 also gave kind of a roots for the 1851 constitutional amendment of a thorough and efficient system. The Northwest Ordinance states that religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged. And so early on, schools were assigned a geographic base, and schools were assigned a governmental base, so to speak. Now, beginning in 1825 in Ohio, the law provided for districts to be set up within each township, and taxes to be put forward for the support of schools, and community representatives to govern schools. So schools have always been, and I want to repeat this because it's important. Schools have always had a tax base, a geographic base, and a governmental base. That is, people representing communities being assigned the responsibility of managing schools. The common school movement began in the early 1800s. The Ohio legislature, in fact, in 1837, engaged Samuel Lewis to be the superintendent of common schools in the state of Ohio. Then in 1847, the legislature passed the Akron Law, which provided that all schools within the city limits or the town limits would be governed by one board of education. And so we have that governance structure. Then in 1851, we had the delegation, the Constitutional Convention, providing that the state would be responsible for a thorough and efficient system of common schools throughout the state. And then in 1851, 1853, they had enabling legislation that provided, among other things, for a state commissioner of common schools. And in 1912, we had another constitutional amendment that provided for that there would be provision made by law for the organization, administration, and control of the public school system supported by public funds. And then in 1953, we had a constitutional amendment that provided for a state board of education and a superintendent of public instruction. So therefore, we have this geographic base, the schools supported by taxes, regulated by state policy, and operated by local communities. And public funding for private education was not an issue in the early days of at least for the first 100 years. Money for private education was not even a consideration. But I want to give a little evolution of how we got into that. We as a state have gotten into this whole matter of supporting private education or supporting people sending their kids to private schools. As early as 1840s, there was a bishop by the name of Hughes, John Hughes of New York, that demanded public funds for his schools there in New York. That was as early as 1840s. Now, all branches of government, that is the executive, judicial, legislative branches of government, all branches of government rejected that idea of public funding for private education. But in 1947, I believe it was the Emerson case, the U.S. Supreme Court allowed for school districts to transport kids to private schools. And that was kind of the beginning of this whole matter of putting public money into private hands for education purposes. Then in the 1950s, following that Emerson decision, there was an economist by the name of Milton Friedman who promoted the idea that the only role of government in education is to provide vouchers for each kid. Now, President Reagan liked that idea, that voucher idea, and he commissioned a committee to study education, and the committee issued a significantly flawed report called the Nation at Risk Report, which set the stage for public funding to private alternatives to the traditional public common school system. Ohio began subsidizing private education in the late 1960s with the provision to require school districts to transport private school kids to private schools. Then came along the idea of auxiliary services, where they channeled money to the the public school districts for the purpose of providing various resources to the private system. And then Governor Voinovich during the 1990s, the early 1990s, being a zealot of diverting public funds to private education, commissioned what he called a public or a parent committee, a parent voucher committee. He actually called it a parent choice committee, but it was actually a voucher committee. And he engaged an industrialist in Akron, Ohio, who was a big supporter of private education by the name of David Brennan. Yep. And was appointed chairman of this parent choice committee. They picked some people to be on that committee who would go along with some of these voucher leaning ideas. And so in early 1990s, they come up with this Cleveland voucher program, which put money into, they redirected some Cleveland school district money. They put it into vouchers. And it just so happened that the number of vouchers that they supported equaled the number of seats that were vacant in the diocesan schools there in Cleveland, Ohio. That was just kind of, it was, I suppose somebody would say it was coincidental. Well, then in 1999, we had this charter school program, which is nothing more than in most cases a corporate operated school system. 1999, the legislature put forward for the pilot project that involved just slightly less than $11 million for a pilot charter school program. Before there was any research done, in fact, within 6 months or so after passing that charter school law, they added about another amount of money of $50 million. And then the next year, $100 million. And that program has escalated, that privately operated program has escalated to about $1 billion a year. Now, the voucher program then in Ohio has increased from this modest Cleveland voucher program to this year a $354 million program. And so between the charter school deduction from school districts and the voucher deduction from school districts, we have about $1.2 billion this year being extracted from school districts and put into the hands of private individuals, either for charters or for private schools, parochial and private and other private schools. So we have over the last 2 decades, this state has deducted over $15 billion for charters, and which are essentially corporate schools, and the voucher program going to private schools. Now, just to kind of bring those numbers down to something more tangible for us to think about, the Columbus School District has had $1 billion. Now think of this, $1 billion in charter and voucher deductions over the years since these programs have been in place. One school district, $1 billion extracted from that school district, $766 million for charter schools, and $174 million for vouchers. Therefore, about $1 billion, one district has lost $1 billion for these programs over the years. Now, these schools, whether they be private schools or charter schools, there is no private school advantage in terms of academics. People have always thought private schools are better, but the research shows that if you control for demographics, who goes to these schools, that there is actually a public school advantage. A kid is better off in the public system. Now, so there is no private school advantage, and of course there is no charter school advantage. And if we think of the corruption that goes on in the charter industry, ECOT, the Electronic Classroom of Tomorrow, is a poster child for corruption in the private charter school business. ECOT has always, when they were in operation, they've always cooked the books in terms of enrollment. And it's very interesting that back in the early days of ECOT, Electronic Classroom of Tomorrow, ECOT was audited. They did a student audit. The State Department of Education did a student audit, and they found that ECOT had overcharged the state over $1 million. And so the Department of Education demanded that money be paid back to the state. Well, something strange happened along the line. And that's that a Department of Education official, in connection with that payback, signed an agreement with ECOT that the Department of Education would not give a student audit again. And so for at least 15 years, the State Department of Education did not do a student audit. Then under some pressure, the State Department of Education did an audit of ECOT and found that ECOT was taking $60 million in 1 year. Now listen, $60 million in 1 year. More than they deserve, more than they could identify as having students to back up that $60 million. Well, that's probably the kind of corruption that went on the previous 15 or so years. By my estimate, ECOT stole some at least $500 million. Here's this company stole about at least $500 million. Now, they're in court. The state of Ohio is in court, you know, with regard to this whole matter of ECOT. And you know, nothing's probably going to happen. That owner of ECOT is probably going to walk scot-free. In some other states, they've been putting people in jail for stealing money. That is, you know, charter school people. They just recently, some people in Arizona were put in jail or are being put in prison for taking money that didn't belong to. So the bottom line here is that there's no private school. That's a myth. That these voucher schools and charter schools are not in generally speaking, not generally speaking, as good as the public school environment. And so we just have a terrible situation here in Ohio where $1.3 billion plus going out for charters and vouchers. And here we have a situation where the kids left behind have less money. Now think about this. Over the years, the $16 billion that has been, those dollars that have been taken from public schools, think of what good could have happened in those public schools. Think of the additional choices that could have been offered in those public schools had that $16 billion been left in the public domain rather than putting it into private hands that involved in a lot of cases a lot of fraud and corruption. So that's kind of where we are, and I just think that Ohio has gone down the wrong path with this privatization. And one of the things that we're doing now, we brought the DeRolf case, the coalition brought the DeRolf case back in the 90s, in the early 2000s. Now we're going to be involved. We have an effort going forth to challenge the constitutionality of the Ed Choice vouchers. And so we're going forward with that. We're putting together a group of school districts that are going to fund that case. And in fact, we're getting ready to interview law firms to bring forward that case. So
Great.
I'll stop right there and we'll talk about it if people have questions or whatever.
Yep. Whew. Well, take a breath first, folks. It's just a very impressive survey of past and immediate present. And I know there's a lot more that could be dealt with here. So why don't we get into questions, comments? You can either put them in chat, or if you wish to say something and be acknowledged. How we generally work in these kinds of situations where we have people like this is, if you want to be recognized, just say your name followed by the word chat, and then you know, we can call on people. So
Lois, chat.
okay, so Lois, who else would like to be on the stack? Anybody else for now? Okay, Lois?
I would. And chat.
Okay, Scott. Lois,
Hi, Ann.
Ann, and then Mike.
My question to you, Bill, is why can't we have a statewide vote? I forgot the official term, where the public gets to vote whether or not they agree that money should go, public money should go to religious schools, because wherever that has taken place, the public says no, they don't want it. But we've never done that in Ohio, and I'm wondering why not.
Well, I think that would be a good, maybe even a good alternative to litigation. But I've been involved in a couple of statewide referendums. I've been involved in two attempts to a constitutional amendment to deal with the school funding issue. and neither of them have gone forward because it takes a lot of money to get a constitutional amendment or a referendum on the ballot. And for whatever reason, those of us who have a real penchant, a real love for public education, I guess we don't have the money like other groups have to get issues on the ballot and get them passed. And so, I would be certainly in favor of a referendum to repeal the charter school laws, repeal the charter school or the voucher. I certainly would be in favor of that. One of the problems is that we don't seem to be able to get enough enthusiasm among the folks of like mind to get enough signatures and of course raise the money to get such passed. So
Diane Ravitch said that in Arizona it passed overwhelmingly. I wonder where their money came from there. Do you have any idea?
I don't know. I have no idea where how they were able to raise the money.
And Arizona is a conservative state.
Yeah. I remember well back in 2006, 2007, 2008, trying to get the funding issue on the ballot, and we failed miserably in terms of getting enough signatures to get on the ballot. So it probably takes $1 million to get started on a ballot issue, and some ballot issues, as you well know, several millions of dollars.
Yep. All right, why don't we go on next to Ann?
You mentioned the report, A Nation at Risk, and that it was flawed. I wonder if you could talk about some of the things in that report that were untrue or inaccurate. I remember when it came out, it really was covered very heavily in the media, on TV, on the radio, was everywhere. And it did, I think, really contribute to the public thinking the public schools were a disaster. So could you give us a few things that were in that report that were inaccurate?
Let me start. Thank you. Let me start by saying that the Department of Energy, at the time that report was put out, the U.S. Department of Energy did a study on education, and the Sandia Laboratories did the study. Now, these were engineers that looked at the same things that the commission, Reagan's commission, looked at, and they came to an entirely different conclusion. The Sandia report concluded that the public school system has problems. Well, what system doesn't have problems, whether it's in the private sector or the public sector? Every system has problems. But the Sandia laboratory engineers said, we don't need to start over. We just need to make some improvements in public education. And I've been in public education for 62 years, and there have been improvements year after year after year. When I started in public education, 50% of the kids didn't graduate from high school, and the only thing that was necessary to graduate from high school was 16 credits. You could have 16 Ds and graduate from high school. We've had tremendous improvements in public education, and we'll continue to have improvements in public education. But the Sandia report indicated that the commission, the Excellence Commission that put out the Nation at Risk report, didn't take into consideration the fact that a lot more kids were involved. When the data was analyzed, a lot more kids were involved in taking tests and taking, the ACT and the SAT and so forth. A lot more kids were involved, and that Sandia report indicated that that the commission just absolutely came to the wrong conclusion about the data. And so, I mean, there's a lot of real specific data that I mean, it'd take too long to get into the real specifics. But the bottom line is, I think they could have written a report. I think they could have written that report before they even did the study, because they had the conclusions. It's very interesting that President Reagan, when he received the report and had some publicity with regard to the report, he said, one of the things he said is that I'm really happy that they recommended vouchers in the report. Well, they didn't even speak to vouchers, but you see, that was the mindset of the president. He was thinking that they might recommend vouchers, and he said, "Yeah, they recommended vouchers, and I'm very happy about the report." So they just misconstrued the data.
Thank you.
Okay, Mike.
Yeah, Bill, I want to thank you very much for your information here. It's really good to know and to see the whole span of history there. I appreciate that very much. My question is, you mentioned that you're getting some school boards involved in some attempt to turn this back. What school boards do you know are involved, and how do you go about getting other school boards involved to join? I mean, is it possible that you're looking for that? That's all. Thanks.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the question, as all questions. But we have. Let me give you a little background on this. The coalition was involved, obviously, in the DeRolf case, and we, against all odds, we backed the state down. We stared the state down on that. But several months ago, I was contacted by some board members, specifically a board member in Canton City, and asked if the coalition would be willing to support a movement to challenge the Ed Choice Voucher Program. And I said, sure, we would be able to help, and would be, and we have members that are already members of the coalition. And so, long story short, right now we have at least 40 school districts that are specifically helping to support litigation against the Ed Choice Voucher Program. Some of those districts are Canton, Dayton, Cleveland Heights, University Heights, Westerville, Worthington, and districts downstate like Portsmouth, Clay Local, up in Columbiana County, Crestview Local, over in Western Ohio, Fostoria, and Southeastern Ohio. We've got a number of rural districts in that area of the state. So the point is, we've got interest in all quadrants of the state. We have interest among all school districts: city, urban, rural, exempted village, and education service centers. So we're just at this point, we're continuing to recruit districts, and anything anybody can do to talk to board members in their own districts about joining the effort, we would appreciate you doing so. But we're going forward with it. In the next couple of weeks, we're going to be interviewing law firms, and we will be selecting a law firm to go forward. We're dealing with a public relations firm that we're going to be contracting with, and so we're going forward with the effort. But we obviously need, litigation is costly, and we need additional help.
Well, Bill, just one thing, it's not, can someone enlist, your website is listed, I think, in the chat possibly. If not, can someone put that in? Are those schools listed at your website?
I don't think we have those on our website yet, but let me next week when I get back to the office, let me send Lois or Greg or tell me who to send it to. I'll send a list of them.
Okay.
That'd be
And
good.
then I also
That'd be good, because I'd like to, oh, I'm sorry. I'd like to contact my school board and find out about it. Send this talk, this wonderful talk you just gave, if it's made available, and to some people on the school board and onto the council.
What is your school board?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is your school board?
Talmadge City Schools.
Thanks.
well, let me, somebody email me as to where to send this information, then they can send it out to everybody concerned, or you can, let me give you my private email address if you don't mind. It's let me start over, WPHILLIS @gmail.com. It's real simple, WPHILLIS.com. And I'll be glad to send that. Also, I'll send you a list of the other members of our coalition. We have about 140 or so other members as well. So in a sense, we have nearly 200 districts that are, involved in this so far, but we obviously need more. Now, one of the problems we've had is that all during the summer, due to the pandemic, school officials weren't in their offices. And you leave a message and you might get a call back, you might not. And then obviously school district personnel are just up their necks and at their wits' end in trying to get school in session. They're getting different from different health departments, and they're really in straits, and they some of them haven't had time to really think about these things yet, but we're going forward, and we're going to challenge this Ed voucher program in court.
Great.
Go ahead, Sandy.
Kathleen, who comes from a long line of teachers, which is kind of cool. They must have some stories to tell. It'd be interesting to hear them tell those stories from the viewpoint of funding. But at any rate, Kathleen has said, are we going to talk about racism connected to this?
Well, is that a question?
Yes. How does race configure into how do you assume racism is fitting into the way that public schools and vouchers and this whole system has been concocted, is working itself through our system?
Well, let me go back. The first Constitution of the state of Ohio, the first Constitution said that there would be no law passed which prohibit the poor from equal participation in schools, academies, colleges, and universities in the various townships and counties throughout the state. Back the first Constitution, people were wise enough to understand that maybe the poor people of our wouldn't have the same level of political clout that others have. And so, from my perspective, the poor people, regardless of race, have been shortchanged. Poor rural districts have been shortchanged from the beginning. I've gone through the history of all the commissioners of education back in the 1800s, and all of them were saying that the rural schools were being shortchanged. Now, I first began teaching back in 1958, and we became administrator in 1965. When we wanted to get a good curriculum, or we wanted to see some best practices or whatever, we generally went to the city districts, because the city districts, when I first started teaching, Cleveland had the Great Works program. Cleveland had gifted programs. They had special education programs. And Columbus and Dayton and Cincinnati all had great programs. And the reason they had great programs is because in those years they had money. And so there's where the best education programs were. Now, over the years, the money has left the central cities and gone to the suburbs. And so where do you find the great programs? Suburbs, because the money's there. Now, Ohio government, politicians take the oath of office to uphold the Constitution of the state of Ohio. And the Constitution of the state of Ohio requires the state to provide a thorough and efficient system. Well, the state hasn't provided a thorough and efficient system. And now the poor rural areas and the central cities, the Daytons and the Toledos and so forth, don't have sufficient resources to provide the quality of programs that poor kids need. And obviously it has to do with back when I think back when the voucher and charter school movement went forward, some of the politicians were thinking, well, vouchers and charter schools, that's a cheap way. That's a cheap way to provide education. And so they said, well, we'll go into the big cities. Well, with the urban center, we'll start charter schools there. We'll start vouchers in Cleveland. We'll start vouchers in the poor inner cities. Well, the racial makeup in the inner cities, you know what that is. And so the bottom line is, for decades, this state has not paid attention to the poor kids. Now that's the bottom line. And so they're going to give a this malarkey about, well, we're going to give these poor kids in the inner cities, we're going to give them the same opportunity for private education as the richer kids. That is just poppycock.
Right.
It's just wrong, and charter schools and private schools tend to be segregated.
Right. Yep.
We only have a few more minutes for this session, so I want to get in. I had a question too about private schools with Catholic schools. When I was going to them, they were expensive, and now I think they're unaffordable. And I'm just curious as how much the voucher programs helped or hindered them, because they seem to be charging ever more tuition, and fewer people can afford them, and yet they have no money, and yet we hear about all these vouchers going. And then with that, just kind of adding on to Kathleen's, I see a connection, maybe there isn't one, but just the how much of this charters and voucher systems was the result of desegregation of the schools and white flight and all that.
Well, the vouchers caught on there in the South when people didn't want to, integrate. That there's a problem in the South, they shut down some public schools and gave kids vouchers. So there's that connection there. But I think the bottom line of all this is that politicians looking to provide education on the cheap, and then back in the Catholic system, back in the 60s and 70s, there were, I think, 5.6 million kids went to Catholic schools. Now in the nation, there's probably 1.5 million, and there's a lot of seats to be filled there. And as I mentioned early on, when the Cleveland voucher program was started, it just happened to me that somebody did a survey to see how many empty seats they had in the diocese there, and so happened that we had that many vouchers supplied. So, our religious groups looking for, kids to fill the seats they have available, and then there are others that want to have a separate education. And I'm all about private things. In fact, today I'm in a private camp board meeting. I'm on a private school, college board meeting. On a private college. I'm on a private children's home board. I'm all about private. I have a deceased daughter that had a private operation for childcare. I'm all about private school, but I'm not expecting the public to support my camp. I'm not expecting the public to support my university or the children's home. It's a private, nonprofit situation.
Thank you. And the last question for this session is from Joe Logan.
Well, thank you very much. Let's see, I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Coincidentally, I just got a call last night from a state legislator who said that they were going to be introducing a piece of legislation to reform school funding. And we spoke in some depth about the new blending of income tax and property tax that would be in this new formula. And it did not occur to me to ask him about the idea of how charter schools would work into this and voucher systems. So I was wondering if Bill was aware of that new initiative, and they said they're going to introduce it in early October. And one of the co-sponsors will be the new Speaker of the House, so it might move rather briskly. And I was just wondering if Bill was aware of that and if he knew the details having to do with vouchers.
Well, Joe, good to see you again. Was that legislator to contact you, John Patterson?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
Yes.
John is a great legislator, and Bob Cupp is back in the early '90s. I spent a lot of time before Bob Cupp's committee when he was studying school finance. That's what, 30 years ago. Bob Cupp was studying school finance.
Yes.
And I was a member. I was assistant superintendent of public instruction, and we spent a lot of time together. The Cupp-Patterson legislation, which is House Bill 305, has gone through a lot of iterations, and they're coming out with a substitute bill, and it's not perfect, but it is a good response to the DeRolf litigation. It is a good response, and there's a good framework in it. What it does is it connects the foundation program with the actual projected cost of educating kids. That's an important consideration,
right,
to connect the two. And that's what they do. Now, it's not perfect, but it's a place that in future years, if we can get this passed in future years, it's going to provide a framework for us to build on. So it deserves support. And it was put together by with the advice of superintendents and treasurers across the state, the people who are actually dealing with school funding. And they've used a lot of education expertise in that. And they've done, John Patterson and Bob Cupp have done probably more work than any two legislators in the last 50 years on this school funding thing. Now, what they're trying to do is to take vouchers out of the realm of the school district and charter schools and fund them separately. Now, I don't think the charter school and the voucher people will want that, because once you separate them out, then you're going to see that, these data that I quoted early on there, where we have, this year we have $350 million in vouchers and $900 million in charters. Very few people in the state know that, because it's hidden, it's extricated school district. But the Cupp-Patterson thing would take those out, highlight them, and then I think the general public would say, "Oh wow, wait a minute, this is $1 billion, this is $1.3 billion, whatever."
Great. Well, thank you so much for all of those questions. Thank you so much, Bill, for that great insight. Just very briefly, one last comment. I read somewhere once that when unions were forming in this country, that the two main demands early on of unions were the 8-hour workday from the 10 or 11 hours, 8-hour workday, and free public education. Understanding that for economic justice and for democracy, you needed both of those things. And so working people understood the importance of free public education. And just wondered whether, we have this video and it will go out. We'll link this and send it out to everyone. But if you have any concise document that summarizes both the history and sort of what you said today, Bill, if you could forward that, that just tells the story, the narrative of how we came to where we are today, from the public to the private to the, the corporate entity, we'd be glad to forward that along as well. And the same invitation goes to you, Joe. Anything that speaks to the privatization, corporatization of farming, the plight of family farmers, something that's short, distinct, that tells the story, we'd be glad to share that. And anything, again, this goes to both of you, anything that you think Move to Amend in Ohio can do to help support your respective efforts going forward. No, we're not a school district, we're not a board of education. No, we're not family farmers, but anything that, organization like us that has, about 10,000 people on a mailing list across the state that we can do educationally, organizationally, advocacy, let us know. So anyway.
I will be happy to forward some information to you.
Great.
And by the way, a member of the Ohio Farmers Union.
Great. All right. So that's a good segue. And that's a good segue to our second speaker, Joe Logan, who is president of the Ohio Farmers Union, a fifth-generation family farmer. He's operated a dairy farm for 25 years and still is active in that, sits on the board of the National Farmers Union. I'm just linking sending out a link to the Ohio Family Farm Union organization. So check that out, where it explains what they're doing, and he, I'm sure, will explain his effort, their effort at not only trying to protect family farmers, but the importance of sort of contextualizing that in working at the community level, at the, focusing on small businesses and focusing on trying to emphasize not the globalization of our economy, but localization, which is so important, particularly going forward in this era of where everything is trying to be corporatized and globalized, which is not democratic. So welcome, Joe. Thanks very much for being here today. And again, we extended this. Sorry,
Well, thank you
we got started about 10 minutes late. So if you people are able to hang around, we'll try to go maybe till a quarter till, if that's possible. A little after quarter till. Go ahead, Joe.
All right. Thank you, Greg. It's an honor to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thanks to Bill for all the work that he's done in the education field over many, many years. We've worked with Bill off and on for decades, and so it's good to see him again. Good to be working with him. Yes, I have been president of the Ohio Farmers Union for on and off for the last 15, 20 years. And it's an honor to be associated with that organization. That's a 118-year-old organization. Was started by a group of farmers down there that were being exploited by a cotton gin owner. And so they united together and developed a cooperative so that they could withstand the corporate malfeasance that was happening down in the little town of Point, Texas. So that was 118 years ago. And we have, throughout that time, maintained a fidelity to the idea that farming ought to be organized on a more localized, family-based structure rather than industrialized corporate structure. And we are regarded to be I guess, a more progressive farm organization than most. We are a 501c5, a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, but we are normally characterized as being more affiliated with the Democratic side of the aisle than Republicans. But anyway, I personally have been farming for 60 years or more, and I have two primary takeaways from my life on the farm. And number one is that farming is really hard work and it's seldom profitable. And number two, that rural communities are wonderful places to raise a family. And the more that we can do to solidify the survivability of rural communities, the better off we will be. Historians and archaeologists tell us that agriculture began some 6,000 years ago when hunters and gatherers decided, hey, maybe if we plant the seeds here and grow the crop right near here, it will be more efficient. Maybe if we keep our animals, if we capture some animals and keep them here, it'll be more efficient. And historians, many historians credit that agricultural innovation with the opening of possibilities for art and culture, and certainly made it possible for us to build larger societies like villages and cities. So for most of history, of course, agriculture was a very local enterprise, and that's for a very good reason. Agriculture is actually rooted to the soil, so we are locked in place. And if we want to grow crops and if we want to keep animals, they are at a particular location. So one of the inherent tendencies of agriculture has been to be localized. And in our view, that is something that should still be honored. But we don't control the world, and one of the things that drives change is technology. And technology has always moved us toward more consolidation, giving us tools to be able to farm more acres, produce more on smaller acreages. But that technological innovation really just exploded after World War II. And so we have changed agriculture very dramatically, especially in that period of time since World War II. And some of the innovations, of course, the automobile industry got changed over to making tractors right after World War II. And of course, the discovery that nitrogen, which farmers use for fertilizer, was a primary constituent of the munitions industry and the bomb industry. So when they needed a place to transfer over, they started selling all that nitrogen to farmers instead of putting it into bombs. So technology has really taken off since then with the development of large farm machinery, the tractors, the combines, the trucks, the trailers, the ships, the ports, the docks. Now agricultural production can quite easily move from our little town in northeastern Ohio all the way across the globe. And that has opened the door to concentration, of course. If a farmer today can farm several thousand acres because of the large equipment that's available to him, then we need fewer farmers. Now, we believe that it is wise for a whole bunch of social reasons to keep farming localized and to keep it on a scale that is accessible to families and that is manageable for families. But that hasn't always been the case. So concentration has been happening since technology evolved, and but it has really taken hold and really exploded over the last several decades. As a matter of fact, in my experience, there has been a mantra that has developed among our political leaders in the agricultural community, and that mantra is get big or get out. In fact, the most recent iteration of that particular mantra was just last year up in Minnesota when Sonny Perdue, our current Secretary of Agriculture, used exactly that refrain to farmers at a conference up there. And frankly, that's something that I hate to hear. I've always hated it. And when it comes these days in modern times, it's even more painful. So this concentration has been happening over time. And then there's been one more innovation that's a bit more recent in the agricultural industry. And that's rather than the horizontal integration, which is Farmer Smith buys out Farmer Brown, his next door neighbor, and he gets a bigger farm and machines up, and so he can farm more acres. And then he buys out the next neighbor next door. And so suddenly you have very large acreages, very large machineries. And but there's another form of integration that's called vertical integration. And that's when a corporation, let's say a corporation that processes commodities, maybe a mill that crushes soybean into animal feed. It actually buys a farm operation so that they can use that animal feed that they produce to feed their own hogs. Therefore, one individual or one corporation then can consolidate all that wealth into one source rather than having that distributed between a farmer and a processor. So that horizontal integration is something that I think has really taken hold in the marketplace. So we have two types of integration, the horizontal and the vertical. One of the examples of horizontal integration gone mad is the recent mergers of Dow and DuPont, Monsanto and Bayer, and Syngenta and ChemChina. Those were 6 of the major corporations that provided seeds and chemicals to the agricultural industry over the last decade. In the last 2 years, those 6 have consolidated into 3, and only one of them will have a U.S. Controlled management team. Of course, Bayer Monsanto has dropped the Monsanto label since it's a drag on their prestige, and they are now simply called Bayer. They're located in Germany. And of course, Syngenta and ChemChina, I think Syngenta is Swiss, and ChemChina, of course, is Chinese. So that major corporation that provides input for farmers is now owned in China. So I'm going to take a little bit of a pause there and go into the realm of economics, and with the disclaimer that I am not an economist, but the National Farmers Union and I have been studying this issue for decades, economists over time have understood that excessive concentration in any industry can be destructive. And it essentially what it does is if it gets up to a certain rate, it actually degrades competition in the marketplace. So they have established what they call a CR4, a concentration ratio of the 4 largest industries. And economists have determined decades ago that if that CR4, that concentration ratio, gets above 40%, in other words, if the 4 largest industries in any segment control over 40% of that market, that begins to eliminate competition. And that drives up the cost to the people that are buying things, and that drives down the cost or the value of the crops that farmers are selling into them. So let's take a look at our current agricultural industry. In the beef segment, the CR4 is 85%. So it's more than twice above the level that economists say would degrade competition in the marketplace. The pork industry is at 64%. The top 4 corporations own 64% of all of the pork production in the globe. Poultry is at 52%, so well above that level, that danger level for consolidation. The seed industry is over 55. That's a bit of a dated number, and it doesn't include the recent mergers that I just discussed. And potash, which is one of the major input chemicals that farmers use for fertilizer, is at 100% CR4. So competition, it would be kind to say that competition has been neutered in all of these production areas, and it's probably more accurate to say that it has been literally shattered. And the net result, of course, is farmers have to pay higher prices for the things that they buy from these consolidated corporations, and farmers receive less for the products that they produce on their farms and sell. Let's take a look at a couple of illustrations of what I would regard to be overly consolidated market presence. Let's talk about the beef industry. Once again, at 85% CR4. The largest of those 4 corporations is a corporation called JBS. You may have heard on the news they had a number of beef and pork slaughter plants that have had horrible COVID-19 infections where a large number of their workers have been sickened by COVID-19. Unfortunately, our response to that nationally has been pretty poor. Those industries were declared to be essential industries, and between Sonny Perdue and the Secretary of Commerce and our president, they decided that that the workers in those plants had to continue to come to work. If they decided that they were either ill or were afraid of becoming ill, and they decided not to come to work, that they would not qualify for any of the unemployment or sick pay or any of those things. They would simply not have that available. So their choices are come to work or go broke. And unfortunately, the industry has had over 43,000 of their workers sickened by COVID-19 and lost nearly 200 of those to actual death. In terms of the hog industry, the pork industry, that again is excessively consolidated at 64% of the industry under the hands of 4 corporations. The largest of those 4 corporations used to be a corporation called Smithfield Foods, originally established in Virginia. A few years ago, it was purchased by a Chinese corporation, Shangui International Holdings. They have now changed their name to WH Holdings and actually moved their corporate offices to Hong Kong, but they are a Chinese-owned and controlled corporation with the Chinese government having a major stake in their operations. So right now, both of those situations, the corporations not only own the slaughter facilities, but they also own the livestock. JBS owns several major feedlots, the largest of which being Five Rivers feedlot that actually contains millions of cows. And they harvest every day. They have plants all over the United States. And let me just give you another illustration. A generation ago, we had over 10,000 slaughter facilities in the United States. Now that number is down to 1,100 total, but 50 of those slaughter facilities slaughter 98% of all of the meat products in this country. That's includes beef, pork, and poultry. So very consolidated marketplace. Now, what could be worse than a vertically integrated slaughter facility that where you have the slaughter plants owning the livestock itself? And oh, by the way, Smithfield Foods owns 1 out of every 4 hogs in the United States, and they own them from the time that they are born to the time that they show up on the market shelves. So the worst case scenario is one step above that in terms of vertical integration. And the best illustration of that is Walmart, which is now the largest food distributor in the nation. And Walmart has now begun to develop their own farms. They have just built an enormous dairy facility in northern Indiana, right near the Chicago market area, where they now own cows, produce their own milk, process that own milk, transport it into their stores all around Chicago, northern Illinois, and Indiana, and market it directly to the customer. So all of the money and all of the profitability that formerly went to A, the farmer, B, the processor, and then the marketer, now all of it goes into Walmart. So all the profitability is there. Now, Walmart has also just recently established or is in the process of building a large poultry operation in Nebraska. So they're going to do the same thing there. They're going to own the chickens or the turkeys, whatever they're growing, own the processing, and own the distribution. That is kind of the worst case scenario. Of course, it's pretty darn easy to see that this is going to be have a horrible impact on the agricultural industry and the agricultural community. So what's the best way to measure this? People have debated on that, but I think probably the best, most overall way to measure this is to look at the U.S. food system as a whole. Americans spend about $4 trillion annually on food in this country. And I know that when I graduated from high school back in 1967, farmers kept about 37% of every food dollar. Today, that percentage has dwindled down till now the farmer retains only 12% of that food dollar. That's a reduction of 25%. 25% of $4 trillion is $1 trillion in excess profit that accrues to those small handful of corporations that are not even American corporations in this case. In many cases, they are foreign. Of course, JBS and Smithfield being the poster children for that. So this, what we have seen is, especially since World War II, and especially since vertical integration caught hold in the United States, we've seen a tremendous acceleration in the rate of concentration and integration. And the main reason we have allowed this to happen is because of the enormous profitability that these major corporations have to bring to bear, and their use of that enormous profitability to fund our elections every year. And this is one of the reasons we have signed on with Greg and the Move to Amend organization. We know that this is horribly destructive, not only to rural communities, but to our social fabric, but certainly to our small d democracy in this country. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand that this is problematic. And the other issue, the other dynamic associated with this that has really degraded agriculture is what we call the revolving door. So not only does Monsanto and Cargill and all these major corporations have billions of dollars to spend to support candidates for political office and make sure that their friends are in there, but they also populate the agencies. So the head of FDA, the head of USDA, all of these organizations that oversee agriculture, and of course EPA as well, are now populated by former members of those corporations that that fund all of those politicians as well. So it is really putting agriculture between a rock and a hard place. We can't defend family agriculture when we have a Congress that refuses to enforce antitrust initiatives that are already on the books or to build new ones in their places. And I am hopeful that with a new administration, we will have new energy toward adopting things like move to amend and get a grip somehow or other on our nexus of money and politics. For the sake of brevity, I think I'll leave it there. If there are any questions, we'd be happy to deal with those.
Well, fabulous. Thank you so much, Joe, for that very insightful summary of an arena of issues and concerns that many of us are not at all familiar with, but is extremely important given the history of this country, of we the people, of how quote unquote civilization came to be. If you go way back, right? And the domestication of the land and the like. But it's inextricably connected to the democratization as well, since the small d Democrats that Jefferson spoke about, right, was about the yeomen and presumably yeowomen were connected to the land and being independent and not dependent on others. I posted a couple of things that I think are related to this whole topic. One is going way back, but here in Ohio, the former president of the Ohio Farmers Alliance, look at what that guy said way back when. About corporate power. Gee, things have not changed a whole heck of a lot, have they? And then back in 2003, that's a decision overturning the scandalous, how dare people at a local level believe that they should have the right to say that people who own the land should be the only people who farm the land. And there have been a number of efforts around the country that have tried to do this. And when that's been passed, many states around the country that have tried to do that, got stuff on the ballot, passed overwhelmingly. It's what people want. It gets overturned when corporate entities then go to court and say, hey, it's violating the Commerce Clause or it's violating the 14th Amendment. 14th Amendment being that Supreme Court amendment or passed amendment that gave free black slaves due process and equal protection, but has been misused. And, there's a lot of instances beyond the money and politics piece to what Joe has mentioned of how corporate entities have corrupted and hijacked the amendments. And here's another one here. I'm just posting about Monsanto. He mentions briefly Monsanto and their ingredient in Ready Roundup, glyphosate, which European countries and the World Health Organization has deemed carcinogenic. When the state of California tried to force the labeling of that, the corporation went to court and said, you're violating my First Amendment right, not to give money in elections, but my First Amendment right not to speak. So the whole thing of corporate constitutional rights, yes, it does include money in elections, but it's a lot more than that. So that's why, and the agriculture and the family farmer is just a beautiful / horrific example of how corporate entities have hijacked the Constitution for their own benefit at the expense of small family farmers. So, questions?
Yeah, Sandy here. Yeah, you can see I'm subtle about my association with Move to Amend back here, but we do have some questions, and I don't know, Greg, if you said someone, I have Mike, Deb, and Deb, if you want me to ask the question, I can, or you can ask it. And then Michael Kokonis. So Deb, just let me know one way in the chat if you want me to ask a question. But Mike, do you have a question or comment?
Yeah, well, first I want to thank Joe because I think what's pretty important is what he shares shows that what Move to Men's doing is not really a left or right issue in the sense that since it affects, all Americans in such ways that are deep. So I really appreciate that so that your kind of presentation would resonate with people from across the political spectrum, which I think is important in the work that goes forward. We don't just eliminate half the population in terms of the message. So that's all. It's not really a question, but great appreciation for the information that you shared with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead, Joe.
Ready for me?
Yes, go ahead, Deb.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Joe. Also, thank you, Bill, for all that information. I am in Miami County, Ohio, which is very rural and very, very conservative. And one of the things that we're trying to do to promote the movement is to work in solidarity with people who are affected by, corporate power. So I'm wondering if you know of any farmers here in Miami County who are with your union who would be interested in either having a presentation about Move to Amend or working with our group to educate the community about the need and how it impacts people right here in our community, particularly our rural community with our family farms. Pass.
Yes. I would just respond to that. Yes, we have a number of members in Miami County. I'm not remembering the exact number right now, but it's around 100 families in Miami County. And I'm sure there's someone there that would want to do that. We actually just lost our county president, and I'm struggling to remember his name right now, but let me look at my membership list here over the next few days. And if you'll share your email with me, I will get back to you and suggest a name from Miami County. We also have a Miami Valley Farmers Union that is headed by our state vice president, Bill Miller, who some of you may know. But Bill is one of the few black farmers in the state of Ohio, and he's a pretty good spokesman for these issues as well.
Okay, thank you. Michael, I'll go ahead and read yours, and then if you want to add to that's.
I'll read it.
Is that okay? Go for it.
Yeah, I'll just ask the question. My question isn't so much about Move to Amend, but thank you so much, Joe. I want to echo what Michael Carano just said. That's part of where my question is coming from. I teach college, and I teach now in a rural area, and I'm thinking that these kind of conversations might make some of those things easier to bring to life different kind of issues, partly because of the less partisan issue. But I remember hearing a story that I'm probably forgetting the numbers, but it was some huge number of family farms that were getting lost each week. I don't know if that decline continues in some kind of big number, but I wondered about that. I was specifically wondering about Ohio, but I actually am not sure if you're only in Ohio, so forgive me for not realizing that. And secondly, just confirming that, but also I wondered if there was like a tool. I remember some years ago, I found a document that sort of outlined, like if you bought a t-shirt and it would have all these facts and figures around the picture of a t-shirt, like where it started, where the material started, where it was made, and kind of broken up with some data. And I wondered if there's like a milk carton or some graphic in farming that might do something similar to point to these, the many issues. Some are environmental, some are, of course, economic and all the things that you just listed. But I don't know if something like that exists. I've never tried to search on Google, but maybe you already know if there's a documentary or an infographic or something like that that might be useful. If I can't get a speaker to represent your views, I could at least use the tool maybe to do something like that. And I think that's basically the point that I want to make or ask about, if you have something like that.
Okay. Well, great. Thanks for your question. I know that Ohio has about 70,000 farms left in Ohio, and many of those are organized as a corporate structure. Like our farm in northeastern Ohio is Logan Brothers LLC, so it is officially a corporation, but it's a family farm. And we define family farm as that a family has ownership and control of the land and the assets. They take the economic risk associated with farming, and they provide a majority of the labor on the farm. So that's where we differentiate ourselves from the large industrial farms. In other words, we don't bring in fleets of Mexicans or hire somebody off the street to do all of our crops. We keep it small because we're expected to do the work, and that's pretty important. And yes, farmers are being lost at an enormous rate. I know my colleague up in Wisconsin had documented that they lost 800 dairy farms alone just last year.
Oh,
And of course, if you include other types of operations, the hog farms and the grain farms, it's going to be substantially larger than that. But we're losing farms at a very rapid rate, both in Ohio and elsewhere. And I don't have a good number for that. In terms of a tool to use in your teaching, I would refer you to the National Farmers Union website. That is nfu.org. Pretty simple, nfu.org. They have got a number of things on the National Farmers Union website that you might be able to use. And also, we have a unofficial National Farmers Union historian, a gentleman named Tom Giesel from Kansas, that holds on to a lot of things like you're discussing. And if you'll once again share your email with me, I'll see if I can trigger Tom to look through his files and send something like that, because I'll bet it's been done before. So,
yeah, that's
but
great.
thank you very much for your question.
Appreciate it.
You're muted.
I don't see anyone else in the chat, so if you have a question, feel free. I wouldn't mind asking a quick question, or a comment, and then I see you, Kathy. One is, I just really appreciate these facts and figures, because these are things that I'm always thinking about, but I don't have anything to ground my suspicions in, other than that they're well-grounded in just what we see around us. So, and I really wonder about how people are getting sick, the algae blooms like in Toledo. I mean, all of these issues, just too much to cover in one call, I know, but it's intense. My one question is, I'm thinking of people who are running for office, local candidates who are running for office. And would it be wise to give them your information? Is this something, because they have all these, they're in rural areas, and I think they could do well to understand, but are we talking about, would that be something you would be interested in hearing from them if they have questions, and kind of networking, because they're talking to a lot of people. You want to talk to a lot of people. Is there a connection here or not?
Yeah, absolutely. That is something that we're always willing to do. We actually have a small PAC as well. So if we find somebody who understands agriculture in its depth and complexity and understands the market challenges that we have, we would love to make sure that they succeed and are elected to office and can remain there. We were a little more sparing with our PAC this year, because most of the legislature was engaged in that House Bill 6 calamity last year, and we decided that we were not going to fund anybody that supported that. So we kept a little bit of our powder dry, so we could probably support a few more new faces if they were interested.
Okay, thank you very much. I will let them know. And everybody can do that with their people they know who are running. Kathy.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. And I'm married to a guy who grew up on a dairy farm not too far from you in Andover. So I know the risks
Well,
of work.
cool.
Yeah. I wanted to ask if you know anything about the Toledo situation, which Sandy mentioned, the Lake Erie Bill of Rights that was passed in Toledo to save the lake, to protect the lake, and the Drews family farm, or Drews farm, whatever they are, that filed a lawsuit. Can you comment on that? And can you comment on what farmers can do to help prevent that problem with the algae bloom?
Well, yeah, I'm very familiar with that larger toxic algae issue. I was a member of the phosphorus task force back several years ago, and we studied that in depth. And of course, one of the major conclusions was that agriculture was the primary source of the phosphorus that was feeding the algae and causing the toxic algae blooms. We watched the Lake Erie Bill of Rights situation, and frankly, we were behind the scenes. We never took an official position on that, frankly, because the Farm Bureau, which is our primary adversary in agricultural policy, was really quick to come out and demonize anybody who might be supporting that bill. And so we kind of kept a low profile on that, but we communicated with the people that were driving that issue and let them know that we agreed. In fact, I did a couple of PR spots on that saying that, hey, listen, if corporations can be regarded as people to have rights, why cannot a living organism like Lake Erie, especially since we depend so broadly upon it for drinking water and all sorts of other industrial purposes. So we are supportive of that initiative. I know that it's already been knocked down in the courts, but we think that that has value. And if we have to die on a hill, that would be one that I'd choose to die on, that Lake Erie should have as much to say as a corporation. So.
Okay, thank you. I think a lot of us agree. Greg and then Eric. If there's anyone else.
I just put a couple things in the chat, 2 questions. Do you think the Farm Bureau, the National Farmers Union, would consider reviewing our We the People Amendment nationally for possible endorsement? That's one. And second, I know at one time here in Ohio that if you were a nationwide insurance member, you automatically received a membership in the Ohio Farm Bureau, which of course artificially swelled their membership and gave the appearance when the Farm Bureau lobbyists went to the State House saying, oh, look at all these members we have, giving them then, you know, the corporate farmers disproportionate influence. Is that still the case?
Well, I think they have had to been required now to put a little more space, a little more daylight between the Farm Bureau and Nationwide Insurance. And I don't remember the specific details, but somebody decided that it wasn't quite legal for them to do that. That said, I know that if anyone has nationwide insurance, that they will be heavily solicited by the Farm Bureau as being associated with that. And they use their membership list very strongly. I know the Ohio Farmers Union worked really hard on the CAUV issue. That's property taxes for agricultural operations. And of course, the Farm Bureau has a lot of money, and so they were right out there, and they immediately took credit for all of our great work as soon as we achieved a reduction in their property tax assessment. So they're a pretty sharp organization. They are active in every county, and they are an important political force. And I can tell you, in the very early days when I was Farmers Union president, they invited me to one of their strategy sessions, which was chaired by the Ohio Chamber of Commerce. So that'll give you an illustration of where their mindset is.
Oh, unbelievable.
Yeah. Oh, and with regard to the National Farmers Union supporting Move to Amend, I thought they already had, but I will double back on that. And I would strongly urge that. I chair their legislative committee and of the board, and I would strongly recommend that we do this. Maybe, Greg, if you'll just send me a brief email solicitation that I can share with the rest of the board members, I'll do that.
Thanks, will do.
We're at the end of our time. I think Eric had a question. Is that, Eric, did you have a question?
But it would probably take Joe 5 to 10 minutes to answer. It had to do with the amount of daylight between corporate America and cooperatives, agricultural cooperatives. So that may be a topic for a different time.
Well, let me get in, and then we'll let Greg decide on that. But let me get in this quick question because it's related to what we were just talking about. And then I'll hand over to Greg and he can lead us out. But Kathleen asked, Ohio Farm Bureau has an influence on local SWCDs. Does Ohio Farmers Union try to get invited to their meetings, etc.? That's in the chat.
Well, we do participate with the local soil and water conservation districts. We don't have enough money to spend on supporting and advertising with some of these organizations, but all of our members are conservation minded, and the soil and water conservation districts, SWCDs, do have a dog in that fight. That said, we have advocated to restructure those soil and water conservation districts around watersheds rather than around counties. That would make them a little more associated with the environment rather than the political entities there. And political entities is where the Farm Bureau wants to keep them.
Thank you.
Well, I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind, Joe, to maybe take a minute, even though it may require 5 to 10 minutes, as Eric is suggesting. But the whole idea, I think it's a very important topic of the relationship between family farms and cooperative farms. And I'll just add to that CSAs, which, these days, as people are looking to get back to the land and more sustainable agriculture, more sustainable living, this kind of intersection between urban, rural, local self-preservation. Can you just sort of comment on, where this is headed in the future and how that may be something that we on the ground can support or fuel?
That is an excellent question. And our organization has always been supportive of the ideal of cooperatives. That said, I think it's safe to say that cooperatives have been extremely compromised over the last several decades. I served for several years as a member of the board of directors of Dairy Farmers of America, which is the nation's largest cooperative, a $2.7 billion annual cooperative now. And I know that they are extremely cozy with the corporate business, a lot more cozy with corporate businesses than they are with their members, who are supposed to be their owners. So I know that when I was a member of their co-op and producing milk and sending it to them, our cooperative organization always paid less than any of the other competitors in the marketplace. And I think that's true of most co-ops. Most co-ops, once they become established and successful, build an insulation structure around their leadership, and that leadership builds associations with the members of corporate America that they use to build the marketing alliances to. So I think most large agricultural cooperatives have been severely compromised. I know that Ohio's cooperative law and most other states now have been amended to allow non-farmers to have seats on the board, and even to have processors have seats on the board, which is another move toward the integration system that has been so destructive to agricultural communities. So we still love the ideal of cooperatives, but I think that they need to maintain a regionality or a small scale and regional focus.
Great.
Thank you for the answer.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Greg, for making time for him to answer that.
Yeah, sure thing. I think it was an important question, as all of these questions and comments were by all of you today. And so again, thank you so much for hanging tough, sticking with this. We did go over, but I hope you felt it was worth it. I sure did. And thank you, Joe, for sticking around as well. I see that Bill has left, but thanks to both of you. And again, just to reiterate, Joe, any writing that sort of summarizes sort of the privatization, corporatization of farming, family farms, anything like that, that's kind of short, succinct, and the like, if you can forward that to us, we'll make sure that it goes out with, as part of the follow-up. That will include the link to this video and any announcements from Move to Amend. And just very briefly, several things coming up nationally that you will receive a notice of in the follow-up. There's a couple, 3 in fact, important national gatherings, virtual of course, all of them. On the 1st is going to be a national a program presentation by our director, Caitlin Sapoki Belknap, challenging corporate rule and fighting for democracy in the age of coronavirus and climate change. On the 6th, there is a program that the Interfaith Caucus of Move to Amend is sponsoring called The Immorality of the Climate Crisis and Corporate Rule. And then on the weekend of the 24th and 25th, we're holding what's called a People's Movement Assembly, very participatory gathering where we really look even beyond the We the People Amendment to start brainstorming what we call developing toward a people's constitution. So look for all of that. I will send a notice to that. And the last announcement to be made, maybe some of you have heard, there's going to be a presidential debate coming up in a couple of days right here in our fine state of Ohio, in Cleveland. I am going to be carrying a Move to Amend banner and signs. Any of you in this part of the world that would like to join me, please do so. And we're going to be out there in mask, gargling, gurgling, injecting with sanitizer to make sure, that we are safely separated from everybody else, but to try to make the connection and to raise the issue, because there's a whole lot of stuff that's being talked about that has nothing at all to do with these fundamental root causes and concerns that we think the We the People Amendment, corporate rule, money, and politics addresses. So any of you who are interested, please chat me, email me, or whatever. I've already gotten a few suspects who are willing to join me, so let me know. All right, with that, thank you again so much. Appreciate your time. And I think we were talking, were we not, Sandy, that after the election, we may do something that looks at during this lame duck period, not just at the federal level, but at the state level, where there is discussion about redoing HB 6, I should say. The whole, issue around First Energy, that may be where these lame duck people try to do some mischief and come back with some half-ass thing that gives the appearance of major change when in essence it does basically Zippo. And so we need to try to be ahead of the curve on that as much as we can. So we may try to have some educational thing to sort of demystify, understand what is really being suggested and how the hell we can try to really cause a lot of pressure on our public officials who may try to shield themselves behind this alternative that they think that they're going to try to project as being significant, but really isn't. So that's still information. Watch for that. We'll try to get something out on that. Sandy, you want to add anything else on that?
Well, yeah, Greg, I think you need, let's be fair. I mean, Zippo, some people, very wealthy people are making even more money. And that's something. And, if it trickles down, we'll all benefit. So no problem there. But that would definitely everybody in Ohio knows about this. Tell your friends and everybody, because it's going to be explosive, because we'll have, updates and people in the know and see what we can do about it. It's not just about hearing what has happened to us, but what are we in a democracy right now? Because it doesn't seem to be when so many people, they're putting an energy plant in Ohio State. I don't know if you heard about it. And most everybody was against it, and yet they're doing it anyway because of a few lobbyists. And so that's who we are. Central Ohio has a lot of different programs these days. We have one coming up next month on gerrymandering. I'll send that to Greg to put out in the newsletter. I just want to say thank you for everybody being here. Sorry about the technical things, but thank goodness we have the recording. So
Can I just throw in one comment following up with Greg on Tuesday's presidential debate? There will be a rally sponsored by Sunrise and Resist ORPOL at the Wade Oval Wednesday, the Wade Oval across from the Museum of Art. And then Our Revolution will be conducting another rally at Edgewater Park on the west side. So those two things will be happening on Tuesday, the 29th.
Real quick, Dave, where do you think it's best to be? Wade Oval or Edgewater?
And what time?
They're going to be setting up there all day, but you can arrive anytime you want. I would, if I were going, I would probably go to the Wade Oval event. Unfortunately, I'm not able to attend either of them, but that's happening there. Yeah.
Michael?
Hey,
Know if they are in any need of legal observers or any of those types of folks, and if so, how might I find that information out or get connected to that?
I'm not sure. I think they have medics, they have individuals who are all set up. I think they're all set up for all of the first aid people, people who will be peacekeepers, basically. And they're going to, of course, observe masks and social distancing, but they will have a number of speakers.
Yeah, National Lawyers Guild, I would check. Ohio National Lawyers Guild.
Yeah, there you go.
And I guess my question, I didn't ask it right, sorry. I will check with them. I am interested in knowing, can I find that information about the organizing, David, you just said, can I find that online somewhere?
Yes, you can go to resist ORP/OL
okay.
Cleveland.
All right.
Great. All right.
Can I add something? Hey, Greg, can I add something? This is Ann.
Sure.
So I work with Sunrise, and if you would put your, Michael, if you would put your contact information, I will make sure that they don't need any more legal observers, but I would think that they would welcome as many as possible.
Great.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you again, everyone, for sticking around. Appreciate your time, and have a good rest of the weekend.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.